My name is Henry Wallace. For 40 years, I taught history to high school students, a profession that suited my temperament perfectly. I find comfort in the patterns of the past, in the long, slow unfolding of cause and effect. My life, until recently, was as quiet and ordered as the library where I spent my weekends. My wife, Eleanor, was the vibrant color in my monochrome world. She filled our old colonial home in Seabrook Harbor with laughter, the scent of fresh-baked bread, and a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood. When she passed away 5 years ago, the color leached out of everything, leaving only the quiet framework of memory. It was into this quiet framework that my daughter, Chloe, and her family moved. Her husband, Mark, a man whose ambition always outpaced his acumen, had lost their savings in a disastrous tech startup. They arrived on my doorstep with 2 young children, a mountain of debt, and faces etched with desperation. My house, Eleanor's and mine, was large enough. My heart, still aching with loss, was larger still. I welcomed them in. 5 years passed. The quiet of my home was replaced by the chaotic energy of a young family. I didn't mind the noise. What I began to mind was the silence that followed my questions, the way my presence became part of the background, like the grandfather clock in the hall, a familiar, ticking piece of furniture that no one truly sees anymore. The brochures for the Caribbean cruise lay scattered on the polished mahogany of my dining table, their glossy blues and whites a stark contrast to the muted tones of a New England autumn. Chloe's fingers, adorned with a manicure I knew my pension had inadvertently funded, traced the outline of a ship as grand as a floating city. Mark leaned over her shoulder, a proprietary air about him, as if he'd personally negotiated the vessel's construction. His parents, Richard and Susan, were seated in the wingback chairs that Eleanor had so lovingly reupholstered. They nodded along, discussing cabin upgrades and shore excursions with the easy entitlement of seasoned travelers. "The Street Bart's package looks divine," Chloe announced, her voice a melody of excitement that was no longer directed at me. "All-inclusive, balcony suite, private dining options." I reached for a brochure, the heavy paper cool against my fingertips. "That sounds lovely, dear. When do we?" Chloe's hand covered mine. It was a gentle touch, but the pressure was unmistakable, a soft but absolute barrier. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice laced with a careful, rehearsed sympathy. "You're getting on in years. A big trip like that, it's just too much for you." The words didn't land like a blow. They were more insidious, like a slow-acting poison. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. I must have misheard. "It's better if you stay here and look after the house," she continued, her tone now brisk and practical, as if she were arranging for a pet sitter. "We're going with Mark's parents. It's been their dream to see the islands, you know." Richard chuckled from his chair, a portly, self-satisfied sound. "Can't wait to feel that sun on my face. Been a long time coming." He was 71, 3 years my senior. Susan, at 68, nodded in serene agreement. "And the children will adore the kids' club. They have rock climbing walls on these ships now." I looked from their animated faces back to my daughters. Somehow, at 68, I was too fragile for a holiday, while they were primed for adventure. "I've always wanted to see the Caribbean," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Mark clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of hollow camaraderie. "Maybe next time, Henry. This is more of a family thing." Family. The word, once the bedrock of my world, felt like a stone in my chest. I watched them, a foreigner in my own home. Chloe was now showing Susan photos of the ship's spa on her phone. Mark and Richard were debating the merits of deep-sea fishing versus a catamaran tour. They were a closed circle, and I was on the outside, a ghost at the feast. They moved with the unthinking confidence of people who had made their decision long before this conversation, without once consulting the man whose roof sheltered them, whose quiet generosity had been the foundation of their lives for half a decade. "The ship sails next Friday," Chloe said, her gaze still fixed on her phone. "We'll be gone for 10 days. You'll have the whole place to yourself. Think of it as your own little staycation." "A vacation from what?" "From paying the gas bill that skyrocketed with their long, hot showers? From buying groceries for 5 on a teacher's pension? From listening to Mark's endless complaints about the job market while he used my high-speed internet to day trade with money he didn't have, I rose slowly from my chair. My knees ached, a gentle reminder of the 68 years Chloe was so concerned about. I should probably get a few things in order, then. For house sitting. You're the best, Dad. Chloe finally looked at me, her smile bright and practiced. It was the same smile she'd used as a girl when she wanted a later curfew. Now, it felt like a tool, expertly wielded. Don't worry about a thing. Just relax and enjoy the peace and quiet. Richard raised his glass of iced tea and a mock toast. To family holidays. They all laughed. Even Susan, a woman who rarely spoke to me beyond polite greetings, laughed at my exclusion in my own dining room. I turned and walked toward the hallway, their voices a cheerful, buzzing cloud behind me. They spoke of turquoise waters and white sand beaches, of experiences I had apparently aged out of overnight. The old floorboards groaned under my weight, the same sound they made when Eleanor and I waltzed in this very hall on our 40th anniversary, giddy with champagne and love. Eleanor would have been appalled. She would have fixed Chloe with that look of hers, the one that could halt a charging bull, and made it clear that family was not a word to be weaponized. But Eleanor was gone, and I was slowly, painfully learning that the daughter we had raised together had become a stranger. As I reached the foot of the stairs, Chloe's voice carried, clear and sharp, across the room. Mom would have understood. She was always saying Dad would need more looking after as he got older. I froze, my hand on the newel post. Eleanor had never, not once, said anything of the sort. She had called me her rock, her steady North Star. But now, it seemed, my late wife's imagined words were being drafted into service, providing posthumous justification for my exile from family joy. The gentle, reflective man I had always been felt a flicker of something else, something cold and sharp, like a shard of ice forming in my heart. Later that evening, the house settled into its familiar rhythm. The television droned from the living room, punctuated by the children's occasional squeals and my family's low chatter. I sat in my study, a room lined with books on military strategy and political history, from Thucydides to Churchill. It was my sanctuary, the one place their clutter had not yet breached. I tried to lose myself in a biography of Lincoln, but the words blurred on the page. Their voices drifted up from downstairs, muffled and indistinct. I had no intention of eavesdropping. In 40 years of teaching, I had learned that you gain more by observing than by hiding. But as I stood to stretch my legs, I heard Mark's voice, clearer this time, rising from the living room directly below my study. Honestly, I think he bought that whole too old nonsense. A wave of cold washed over me. I stood motionless, my hand resting on a leather-bound volume of Roman history. Chloe's laugh was light, tinkling, and utterly devoid of warmth. Dad's always been a bit naive. Remember when we told him we'd pay him back for the new boiler? Their shared laughter was a physical blow. It was casual, intimate, and deeply cruel. I found myself moving silently to the corner of the room, near the old cast-iron radiator, where the sounds from below were most distinct. I was no longer a father in his study. I was a historian gathering intelligence. Richard's voice, rumbling and authoritative, joined in. The timing works out perfectly. We get back from the cruise, give it a week, and then we move him into Maplewood Meadows. I've already spoken to the director. My breath hitched. Maplewood Meadows. I knew the place. It was a sterile, beige building on the outskirts of town, a place where people went to wait for the end. They have an opening in the West Wing next month, Susan added, her tone as practical as if she were discussing grocery lists. They said they can expedite the intake process if we put down the full deposit. How much? Mark asked. $5,000, Richard replied. But it's worth it to get him settled quickly. Once he's in, we can get the house on the market. It's our inheritance, after all. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. I gripped the edge of a bookshelf, my knuckles white against the dark wood. Inheritance. They spoke of it as a certainty, a foregone conclusion. Chloe's voice was bright with avarice. I already have a real estate agent in mind. A guy named Miles. He's the top seller in the area. He thinks we can get at least $950,000 for this place, maybe more if we list in the spring. Split 4 ways? Mark asked, the greed naked in his voice. Of course, Chloe said smoothly. Richard, Susan, you've earned your share for putting up with his moping these past few years. He has gotten rather needy, hasn't he? Susan's voice was syrupy with false sympathy. Always wanting to know our plans, expecting to be included in everything. The entitlement is staggering, Chloe agreed. I mean, Dad, you're 68. It's time to accept that your productive years are over. I sank into my reading chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. 5 years. 5 years of their laundry in my machines, their cars in my driveway, their debts on my conscience. I had housed them, fed them, supported them. And in their eyes, I had not been generous. I had been needy. My desire to be part of my own family was entitlement. Mark's voice rose again, filled with a triumphant excitement that made my stomach churn. The best part is, he'll never see it coming. We've got him so convinced we're just worried about his health. Dad's always been too trusting, Chloe said, and then she delivered the final, devastating blow. Mom used to say he had his head in the clouds. This time, it was Richard who spoke, and his words were an unexpected, bitter grace. Eleanor never said that. That woman adored him. A sharp silence fell, broken by Chloe's clipped, defensive tone. Well, she's not here to object, is she? And frankly, this is what's best for everyone. Dad gets professional care, and we get financial security. Professional care. The neat, clinical euphemism for being discarded. The conversation moved on to logistics, selling my furniture, contacting lawyers, dividing the spoils of my life. I had heard enough. I stood, walked to my desk, and opened the bottom drawer. Beneath a stack of old lecture notes lay the deed to the house. The paper was thick, the ink faded. My name and Eleanor's, side by side. We had bought this house with the careful savings of a teacher and a librarian. We had planned to fill its rooms with grandchildren and grow old together on the porch, watching the seasons change. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. The man looking back was no longer the gentle, slightly befuddled academic they saw. The historian in me had taken over. I was no longer a passive observer of events. I was a participant, and I had just witnessed the drawing of a battle line. I closed the drawer, my movements silent and precise. Downstairs, they were planning my future. Upstairs, I was beginning to plan theirs. Sleep was a country I could not enter. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw not the darkness of my room, but the bright, desperate face of my son-in-law from 5 years prior. It had been a Tuesday night in November. I remember the sleet ticking against the window panes of my study as I graded papers on the American Revolution. The phone had rung close to midnight. Henry. Mark's voice was a ragged whisper. I need help. I've lost everything. The story came tumbling out, a frantic confession of ruin. It wasn't poker or horses. It was something more modern, more insidious. A revolutionary biotech firm he'd invested in, a sure thing promoted by online gurus. He had poured all their savings, a home equity loan, even money borrowed from friends, into a stock that was now worthless. $72,000 gone. Their condo was in foreclosure. Chloe, pregnant with their second child, was sobbing in the background. It was supposed to be the next big thing, he'd stammered. Everyone said it was foolproof. I had listened, my heart aching. Eleanor had been gone less than a year. The house echoed with her absence, a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. Chloe was my only child. Her children were my only grandchildren. We have nowhere to go, Mark had pleaded. Chloe's parents, well, you know Richard. He'd just say, I told you so. We can't ask them. He had known exactly which strings to pull. The grieving widower. The protective grandfather. The man with an empty house and a heart full of memories. I saw it so clearly now, lying in the dark. It hadn't been a desperate plea, it had been a calculated move. I got out of bed and walked to the window overlooking the backyard. The moon cast a silver light on the swing set I'd assembled myself, piece by painstaking piece. The bicycles, one pink and one blue, leaned against the garage, Christmas gifts from me. Training wheels I had attached while Mark was networking at the golf course. My hands trembled as I did the mental arithmetic. 5 years of groceries for a family of 5. Conservatively, $30,000. The utility bills, which had tripled. Another $10,000. The new boiler Chloe had mentioned. $12,000. The emergency dental work for my grandson when their insurance lapsed. $3,000. The down payment on their car after the last one was repossessed. $5,000. It added up to a staggering sum, a quiet hemorrhaging of the retirement Eleanor, and I had so carefully planned. Over $60,000, given freely, with love. And their payment was to call me a burden and plot my removal. The history teacher in me saw the pattern. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the logical conclusion of a 5-year campaign of attrition, a slow erosion of respect, a gradual reclassification of my role from patriarch to pensioner, from benefactor to burden. I went back to my desk and pulled out the small ledger where I'd tracked my expenses since Eleanor died. It was her habit, not mine. You need to know where it all goes, my love, she'd said. Page after page was a testament to their needs. Mark, suit for interview. Chloe, new tires. Kids, summer camp deposit. Each entry was a small act of love, a stitch in the fabric of the family I thought I was holding together. Each one was accompanied by a vague promise of repayment, a promise that evaporated as soon as the immediate need was met. The house creaked around me. In the morning, they would wake up, refreshed and full of plans for their Caribbean paradise. They would pack the suitcases I'd bought them. They would drive to the port in the car I helped them buy. And they would sail away on a sea of my generosity, leaving their problem behind. But as I sat there in the pre-dawn stillness, surrounded by the ghosts of my past and the evidence of my present, something inside me solidified. They had made a fundamental error in their calculations. They had mistaken kindness for weakness. They had confused patience with passivity. I was a history teacher. I understood strategy. I understood that great changes in power dynamics do not happen by accident. They are planned. They are executed. And sometimes, they are precipitated by a single, egregious act of hubris. They believed they were 3 steps ahead. They had no idea I was about to change the map of the entire world they inhabited. I closed the ledger and placed it back in the drawer. The first light of dawn was beginning to gray the window. A new day. A new plan. The morning of their departure was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Chloe directed the packing operations like a seasoned field marshal, ticking items off a list. Mark wrestled with oversized suitcases, grunting with effort. Richard and Susan sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and offering unsolicited advice. Don't forget the Dramamine, Chloe, Susan chirped. The sea can be choppy this time of year. I entered the kitchen and Chloe greeted me with a bright, false smile. Morning, Dad. Coffee's fresh. I poured a cup and watched them. Yesterday, I would have seen a family's excited anticipation. Today, I saw a conspiracy of thieves on the eve of a heist. The shuttle comes at 10, Mark announced. We should be ready to go by 9:30. Did you pack the good camera? Richard asked Chloe. I want to get some shots of the sunset in St. Bart's. Their efficiency was remarkable. The same people who couldn't manage a household budget were masters of vacation logistics. Is there anything special you need me to do while you're gone? I asked, taking my usual seat. It felt like playing a role in a play where I was the only one who knew the final act. Chloe glanced at me, her expression a careful blend of affection and condescension. Just the usual, Dad. Water the plants, bring in the mail. Maybe have Mrs. Gable from next door checking on you now and then. Mrs. Gable was 82 and sharper than all of them combined. The suggestion that she needed to check on me was a masterpiece of subtle insult. I think I can manage, I said mildly. Mark grunted, hauling another suitcase toward the door. Right. Just don't go trying to fix the dishwasher if it acts up again, Henry. We don't need a flood. The man who had sunk his family into a sea of debt was lecturing me on household responsibility. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Of course, I said, nodding agreeably. I'll be on my best behavior. My compliance seemed to suit them. Their focus returned to the imminent departure. The minutes ticked by, each one bringing me closer to my own liberation. You're sure you're okay with being alone? Chloe asked as they gathered by the front door. The question was a formality, a box to be checked on her list of daughterly duties. Absolutely, I said, and for the first time that morning, I was speaking the complete truth. I'll enjoy the peace. She gave me a quick, dry kiss on the cheek. It felt like a transaction. The front door opened, letting in a blast of crisp autumn air. Suitcases rattled down the porch steps. Car doors slammed. Take care of yourself, Richard called from the shuttle van. Have a wonderful, wonderful time, I replied, waving from the doorway. And I meant it. I wanted them to be as happy and carefree as possible. The higher they soared, the more stunning the fall would be. The van pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening. For the first time in 5 years, the only sound in the house was the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was the sound of my life reclaimed. I closed the door, walked back into the kitchen, and picked up the phone. I didn't call Mrs. Gable. I dialed the number for Miles Realty, the top seller in the area. A crisp, professional voice answered. Miles Realty, this is Andrew speaking. My name is Henry Wallace, I said calmly. I need to speak with Mr. Miles. I understand he's the best. I have a house to sell, and it needs to be sold very, very quickly. An hour later, a sleek black sedan pulled into my driveway. A man in a tailored suit, looking more like a Wall Street banker than a small-town realtor, stepped out. This was Alistair Miles. He had an air of brisk, unsentimental efficiency. Mr. Wallace, he said, shaking my hand firmly. Your call was intriguing. You mentioned a 10-day timeline. That's not a sale, that's a magic trick. I'm a retired history teacher, Mr. Miles, I said, leading him inside. I believe in swift, decisive action when circumstances demand it. He walked into the foyer, his sharp eyes taking in everything: the high ceilings, the original crown molding, the worn patches on the Persian runner. Circumstances, he mused. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, prime location, no mortgage. The circumstances must be compelling. They are personal, I said, leaving no room for further inquiry. I require liquidity and discretion. I'm prepared to price the property to guarantee a sale before my family returns from their holiday in 9 days. His eyebrows shot up. Your family doesn't know you're selling. It wasn't a question. They're under the impression I am house sitting, I stated. A slow smile spread across his face. He looked at me with newfound respect. Mr. Wallace, I do believe we're going to get along splendidly. Let's see what we're working with. As we toured the house, each room was a battleground of memory and resolve. In the living room, I saw Eleanor laughing by the fireplace, and I saw Chloe dismissing my feelings. In the kitchen, I saw my grandsons eating pancakes I'd made, and I heard the cruel plotting of their parents. Mr. Miles saw market value and selling points. Excellent bones, he murmured, running a hand over the soapstone countertop I'd installed. Kitchen is updated. The bathrooms could use a refresh, but for a cash buyer, that's a non-issue. The key is finding one who can close in a week. Can you do it? For the right price, I can find a buyer for the Taj Mahal in 24 hours, he said with a wolfish grin. We list it tomorrow at a price that screams once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We target my list of cash-heavy investors. No open houses, no signs on the lawn. A quiet, surgical strike. Surgical strike. The term appealed to the military historian in me. By the time he left, my quiet, memory-filled home had been transformed into an asset, a target, a weapon. That evening, the first call from the ship came. The caller ID showed a satellite number. Dad. Chloe's voice was tinny but bubbling with joy. We're on board. It's incredible. You wouldn't believe the size of this thing. I'm glad you arrived safely, I said, looking at the listing agreement Mr. Miles had left on my desk. The suite is gorgeous. There's a balcony, and you can see the ocean for miles. Mark's parents are thrilled. We were just saying at dinner, it's a shame you couldn't come, but honestly, it would have been too much walking for you. I'm managing just fine, I said, my voice even. In fact, I'm keeping quite busy. Oh? Doing what? Don't overdo it, Dad. Just getting some things in order, I said, a smile touching my lips. Tidying up loose ends. As a matter of fact, I'm preparing a bit of a surprise for you all for when you get back. A surprise? She laughed. How sweet. What is it? Well, if I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, would it? I said. Let's just say I think you'll find things very different when you return. Changed. For the better. Well, all right, she said, clearly perplexed, but dismissing it as one of my eccentricities. Just take care of yourself. We'll call again from Street Barts. I hung up the phone and looked around the silent house. It already felt less like my home and more like a stage, set for the final act of a long and painful play. And I was no longer merely an actor. I was the director. The next 5 days were a blur of calculated activity. Mr. Miles was true to his word. By Saturday, he had a buyer, a development firm from Boston that specialized in snapping up undervalued properties for cash. They saw the potential, the location, the solid structure beneath the worn, familial warmth. Their offer was 20% below market value, but they could close in 5 business days. It's a steep discount, Mr. Miles said over the phone. It is the price of freedom, I replied. Accept the offer. The most difficult part was the packing. I hired a moving company but directed the work myself. I began in Chloe and Mark's room. I packed her expensive clothes, many with the tags still on, into boxes. I packed his self-help books on wealth creation and his collection of unworn, high-end sneakers. I packed the children's toys, their drawings that were taped to the walls, their little shoes lined up by the door. Each item was a memory, a small, sharp pain. I rented a climate-controlled storage unit 20 miles away. It was large and clean and anonymous. As the movers loaded box after box, I felt not sadness, but a growing sense of lightness, as if I were shedding a massive weight I had carried for years. I saved my own things for last. My books, my papers, Eleanor's photograph from the mantelpiece, and a small, velvet box containing her wedding ring. I had rented a modest, furnished apartment on the other side of town. It was small and characterless, but it was mine. It was a clean slate. The day of the closing was the day before my family was due to return. I sat in a sterile lawyer's office with Mr. Miles and a representative from the development firm. I signed my name over and over, the scratch of the pen the only sound in the room. When it was done, a certified check for a sum that still seemed unreal was placed in my hand. I walked out into the bright autumn sunshine and drove to my old house one last time. The movers had finished. It was empty, echoing, and scrubbed clean of the last 5 years. It was no longer my home. It was just a property. I walked through the empty rooms, touching the door frames, looking out the windows. I said a silent goodbye to Eleanor, to the life we had built there. Then I locked the door for the final time, dropped the keys in the mail slot as instructed, and drove away without looking back. That night, in my new anonymous apartment, I ate a simple meal from a cardboard container and looked at my phone. There was a message from Chloe, sent that afternoon. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, Dad. Hope you've missed us. We have so many stories to tell. I smiled, a sad, weary smile. They had no idea what story was waiting for them. The next day, I did not wait by the phone. I drove north, along the coast, watching the gray Atlantic churn. I stopped in a small town, had lunch in a diner, and walked on a windswept beach. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known since before Eleanor's death. It was the quiet, clean peace of a battlefield after the war is decisively won. The first call came at 4:13 p.m. It was Chloe. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came at 4:15 p.m. mark. I ignored it. Then came the texts. Dad? We're home. The key isn't under the mat. Is this some kind of joke? The locks are changed. A man just came out and said he lives here. He says he bought the house. Call me right now. The calls began to come in a frantic, overlapping cascade. Chloe. Mark. Richard. Susan. Back to Chloe. The phone buzzed on the passenger seat of my car like a trapped, angry insect. I let it buzz. I drove to a motel overlooking the ocean, checked in, and finally listened to the voicemails. Chloe's first message was confused, annoyed. Dad, call me. There's some misunderstanding at the house. Mark's was aggressive. Henry, I don't know what you think you've done, but you'd better fix it. Our lawyer will be in touch. Susan's was tearful. Henry, please. The children are crying. We don't understand. Where are things? And then, Hours later came a message from Chloe that was utterly different. Her voice was broken, stripped of all its arrogance. Dad, please. Please, just call us. We're at a motel. I don't know what to do. Please. I counted the missed calls. 43. I looked out my motel window at the vast, indifferent ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. A sunset they had tried to deny me. They had wanted me to have a staycation, to enjoy the peace and quiet. And so I had. I had stayed. And I had created a peace so profound, so complete, that it had reshaped their entire world. They had thought me too old to fly, too old for adventure, too old to matter. They had made a critical error, the kind I'd warned my history students about for decades. They underestimated their opponent. They had forgotten that history is full of quiet, overlooked men who, when pushed too far, are capable of changing the course of empires. Or, at the very least, the ownership of a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet New England town. My phone buzzed again. Call number 44. I let it ring, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. The lesson had begun. I would let them learn for a while. I would give them the time and space to truly understand the concepts of cause and effect, of action and consequence. And when I was ready, on my own terms, I would answer. But I would no longer be a father speaking to his daughter. I would be a historian, delivering a lecture they would never forget.